This is the debut feature-length film by Emma Tummy, and it's set in the Old West, in sort of a frontier settlement, or a house out on the prairie. Well, two houses technically. It's sort of a story about two neighbors, I guess you could say. One couple who's been out there for a while, and a new couple that just moved in. And it's about some strange things that start to happen, things of an unexplained nature. And yeah, it's basically a horror movie, a very minimalist horror movie. I think the entire cast is something like 5 people in total, and the scary stuff is pretty sparse too. And they don't really show you very much, they like to keep you guessing. It's one of these movies where you're never really sure if what's going on is actually something supernatural, or if it's all in the people's heads, which is an approach I usually like. And the way it's handled here is mostly pretty effective, I would say. Less is more in this case. It also keeps the story fairly simple, there aren't that many twists or turns. However, the way this is structured keeps it interesting. Keeps it from feeling too linear and simplistic, because it sort of starts in the middle of it all, with an opening sequence that pretty much perfectly sets a pretty grim tone. It lets you know immediately that this isn't gonna be a very uplifting movie. And it establishes that the life they live out there on the prairie is rough and hard. And yeah, it then continues that storyline from there, but at the same time, it also shows you flashbacks to what happened previously. The events that led up to that starting point, and it sorta alternates between the two. Every other scene basically moves the current timeline forward, and every other scene sheds some light on what happened earlier. And I will admit that a couple of times it took me a minute to figure out which timeline was actually going on. But for the most part it was pretty clear, and I think the structure worked. It just made a very simple and straightforward story feel a bit more elaborate. And you know what, overall I thoroughly enjoyed this one, I thought it was pretty good. Nothing phenomenal, but pretty good. The creepy and scary stuff is effective, and it gets pretty intense at times too. The story worked perfectly well, and there's nothing wrong with the acting either. Everyone did a good job, it's also not a bad looking movie. It's fairly short too, and the pacing ended up being really good. So I don't really have that many complaints, to be honest. Now at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, it's not really anything new or all that inventive as far as the horror genre goes. I've seen similar ideas explored before, more than once. But I don't think it felt stale, and it did a good job with it. It found a fresh enough angle to it, and it showed restraint when handling it all too, which I feel is a surprisingly rare thing in horror in general. People don't seem to get that the less you show, more often than not, the more effective it is. But this movie does that perfectly, it shows you very little. It lets your imagination run wild, which also puts you in the shoes of the characters. Because they don't know what's out there and what's going on either. Which is just another thing that makes this that much more effective. So you know, this really didn't feel played out or like just a blatant rehash of things we've seen before. It felt surprisingly fresh, and yeah, I ended up liking this a fair bit. But how about it? Would I recommend it? Sure, especially if you're looking for some minimalist horror. But even if you're not, you might still want to give this a shot. Or don't. After all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic. And if you'd like, you can also support me on Patreon or PayPal through the links in the description. And as always, I appreciate you, and thanks for watching.